GingerGM.
Welcome to analysis video, and I'm going to be looking at Magnus Carlsen's brilliant victory over Anish Giri from yesterday's game in Croatia from the Grand Chess Tour. This tour where the top players in the world battled against each other in different locations, and at the moment Magnus is unstoppable. Magnus the Unstoppable. And in this game he had the black pieces, and this was a very special game. He managed to win in very good time and very quickly. I mean, okay, I'm giving the result away, but I'm assuming most of you know it, but only in 23 moves with the black pieces against someone who's renowned to be one of the most solid-ish players in the world. So we're going to look at this game here. So we're going to look at it from Magnus's point of view. I know that a lot of people might always like white on the bottom, but I want to be sitting on the winner's side. It makes me feel a little bit more secure about myself. Hope that's all right. And the game started with the Sicilian. So we had e4 from Anish, and now Magnus playing c5. And of course this is his preparation from the World Championships, where he used it very well to get some lovely positions against Fabiano. And it's interesting because, you know, in the last couple of years Magnus has sort of changed the style somewhat, and he's playing more aggressively, more openings with the black pieces, taking more risks. Anish played knight f3, knight c6, trying to go for Nezhmetdinov after d4. But now bishop b5 is the second most popular opening, and this is also something Fabiano played against Magnus, avoiding the Nezhmetdinov. And now in this position Magnus played e6. And the idea of this is, if given time, to put the knight on e7, then play a6, and if white captures on c6 you can capture with your knight. So it's a very good response to this bishop b5. Therefore, white's next move is quite logical. Bishop takes c6, capturing this piece before black can capture with a knight, forcing black to double his pawns. And here Magnus takes towards the center, and already quite an interesting pawn structure. Black has these pawns in the center and the two bishops, but the pawns can always be weak on doubles, being doubled. White continued with d3. Knight to e7 played anyway. This knight is on a better route here than f6, because it can attempt to come over to g6 and to try to control some of the dart squares, which are key to this position. White now played h4, and we already see Harry playing a little part in this battle, and this may look a bit strange, but it's a very logical move. The point being, if knight g6, which is one of black's plans, black kind of wants to go bishop d6 and queen c7 when he has total control over these two squares, maybe with d5 first. White would of course play h5 and embarrass that knight. So it's a preemptive move, and Magnus stops that plan with h5. So they're just, stopping anything happening on that area of the board. White now preempts this knight g6 move and d5 by playing e5 himself. This is really aimed against Magnus's next move, but Magnus plays it anyway, and this is the first kind of interesting moment of the game. Previously f6 had been played on a lot of occasions, and this makes some sense because black wants to swap these two pawns off and keep his nice sort of formation of pawns which all guard each other. But the move Magnus now plays is very interesting. Pawn to d6. Now, positionally speaking, this is a very bad move because you are isolating these pawns, but this is, again, it demonstrates Magnus's style nowadays, which is dynamic chess. He damages his pawn structure in order to gain dynamic play for his pieces. So he's taking risks here. It's only been played once before this move, and that game was between two very strong Russian grandmasters, I think Fedosov and Motylev, European champion Motylev. And this move, Magnus said, was used because he thought Giri would not know this move so well to get Giri out of the preparation. So we see some mind games played. So white takes on d6, and now we see knight g6, because of course black wants to take you with a bishop. And here, knight on fd2. Now, white wants to put the knight on c4, playing against these pawns. This is quite logical, but it's also a bit dangerous to move this knight away from f3. As we're going to see, white disregards the safety of his own king, and he leaves his own king without any defenders. I'd have liked to have kept that knight on f3, personally. Bishop takes d6, and now knight to c4. And one thing you guys want to do if you want to improve your chess is recognize patterns. I'm going to demonstrate a version of this at the end of this game. But when you see a pattern, whether it be in the opening, middle game, ending, you've got to recognize it and be able to not just recognize it, but remind yourself the pros and the cons of that pattern, when it's a good pattern, when it should be used, when it shouldn't be used. Chess is all about patterns after all. And, you know, just from my memory, I know that this pawn structure we see here, let me just digress because I think this is a good way to learn more about chess. If we go all the way back to move one line I know in the same sort of line of the Sicilian with bishop b5 is the line d6. And after capturing here, white plays pawn to e5. And now bishop g4 is one of the main lines, something along this kind of way. Maybe slightly differently played to this, but we had this kind of thing. And I know in this position here, one of the main moves is d6, and I've played this myself. And the point is, you want to go d5. If you play d5 straight away, there's some e6 moves, which are a bit uncomfortable for black in some positions. But the general idea is after e6, we get the same pawn structure as Magnus gets. And again, black is going for dynamic play. In this case, is even better for black, because white has weakened his king with the g4 move. So again, it's recognizing these ideas, being able to compare them in your mind when they're good, when they're not. That will improve your game. Don't learn things, you know, memory-wise, bang, bang, bang. Memorize the patterns. Think for yourself. Think when you should use them, when you should not use them. So let's go back to the game. So after bishop takes d6, the knight comes to this square. And this is a very nice piece, the bishop. So black keeps it secure. And now white develops with knight a3, and black now goes bishop a6 because the light square bishop was not very good. So whenever you want to exchange minor pieces, in this position, the bishop for the knight, or whenever you're thinking about it, just ask yourself the simple question, which piece is better, my bishop or my opponent's knight? And in this case, the bishop is not as good as that knight because that knight's on an outpost, it can't be hit by a pawn. So swapping off those pieces is a good positional idea. Queen to f3, and here Magnus again shows his new dynamic style. I say new, he's always been able to play like this, but it's so exciting. He's playing more like Kasparov now than ever before. If you go back 5 years, you wouldn't have seen many games of Magnus's in this style. But this next move, giving up a pawn with bishop takes c4, allowing queen takes c6 check, is very Kasparovian. Is that even, can we verb it? It's a very Kasparov approach to the game. Going for activity, not caring about material, and playing with fire, trying to play with energy. And I really like it. And I think this comes from extreme confidence in Magnus winning so many tournaments and proving why he's the best in the world. So king f8, and now after this move, I say it was a sacrifice. Magnus wins the pawn back on h4, but it was just this dynamic play. It was a very, I say, mini sacrifice, but this dynamic approach is what is the main real thing that Magnus is doing nowadays. And now white castles, and black now moves the knight to f5, trying to find a very nice square on d4. And also now we can see Harry has no one in the way. So watch that boy closely. Now the next move is where Giri really starts to go wrong. You've got to, in chess, be able to weigh up your positional ideas, stopping your opponent's ideas, but also with the danger coming towards your king. And here, Giri should have played something like rook d1. Instead, he plays knight e2 to try to control the d4 square, but this is far too slow. And he basically, Giri underestimates the power of Harry. Harry will come flying down the board here and open up the white king, and white doesn't have time for such slow maneuvers. a rule in the opening is you shouldn't really move the same piece twice. This could be the opening middle game, but you have to be very careful losing time. This is too slow. Magnus goes rook c8, forcing the queen away. The queen goes to a4, and now a very nice maneuver, rook c7. The idea being, after bishop f4, the rook comes to d7, and Magnus controls the open line, not rushing to fulfill his destiny on the king side. Pawn to c3, another move which is just too slow. Giri really trying to control d4, but there's no time for this. And the next move is a great move. g5. The king side is where Magnus has the initiative. He has this pawn majority of 4 pawns playing against 2. Not just that, White's pieces are not very well defending the king, and White has lost one of his bodyguards, the pawn on h2. Black also has a rook and a knight in that area of the board. So g5, a very logical way to come forwards. Rook on a to d1, another slight error, allowing rook takes rook, rook takes rook, and now a move which Giri said he missed, but it's maybe an obvious move, I think, queen to a8. The queen takes a very strong diagonal looking over at the white king, and this combined with Harry coming up the board is going to create some very nasty threats. Bishop comes into h7, it has to move. Had it gone to e5, simply f6. And now here comes Harry, h4. White is in a diabolical situation here. This move, h3, is going to win the game for black. We see only a couple more moves, f3, and after h3, Giri has enough, and he actually resigns here. The power of Harry, yet again, using that h-pawn in this position with the rook behind it to destroy the protection around the white king. White just is not in a good position to defend his king side, and with ideas of pawn takes pawn, knight to e3, knight to h4, and the queen and the rook, all of a sudden, White's king is completely helpless. So it's a peculiar position, but this position is resignable. White's pieces are just not. I mean, what can White play here? Especially against Magnus Carlsen. I mean, if I was White here, I don't know what. I mean, I'd probably be doing the same as Giri. I can't really move anything. Put yourself in White's positions. Let's try out a move or two. I'm struggling. Let's say we go queen d7 to try to get the queen back. Well, here there's a couple of choices. The simplest being simply pawn takes pawn. We now have ideas of the queen coming in. The king cannot capture because the knight to e3 check. Knight to h4 was also shows how strong this lever of the h-pawn has become. It was quite funny because this kind of pawn structure, again, I want to really get it across to you how you should think of patterns and how these patterns, you know, memory is quite an important tool in chess. I mean, I haven't got the best memory in the world, don't, you know, by any means, but I think my memory is okay, especially for patterns. And you can train yourself in this. I mean, you know, with the amount of beer I've drunk, I've obviously lost some brain cells on the way. But this game reminded me, actually, funnily enough, of a game I played 16 years ago in the British League. And I'm just going to show you that now. If you can sort of picture this and how the H-pawn was used, I suddenly thought of this game. And this game was a game I played with the black pieces against James Cobb. I was about 2400 at the time. I think it was played in 2003. My opponent was about 2300. And we can see after I played bishop takes e5, d4, bishop takes h2, king h1, we get the same kind of thing here. And the important thing to remember here is how do we attack the white king? And again, it's remembering these patterns. The key thing is to try to remove the pawn on g2. How do we do that? By using Harry again. And this gave up a pawn. Like the Magnus game, my king goes to a f8, but the most important thing is like the Magnus game, I was going to say the Harry game, this h-pawn is used as a lever with the rook behind. And it works well because our king is actually quite safe behind the pawns. And we have very good piece play, like Magnus did with the queen. And my game against James Cobb continued in a very similar vein. You can see the h-pawn landing, opening up the king. And as soon as I was able to open up the king, I now had access in to deliver some very nasty ideas. And I can even take my time here. I push the queen away and as soon as the queen goes away, come in with my queen, and this is easily winning. The queen's coming here, the rook is coming to h2. So again, it's very important, if you really want to improve as a chess player, when you look at these games, try to relate it to your own games if you can. Think about, have you ever had opportunities where that's arisen? Think about the pros and cons of these ideas you see in the middle game. And if you do this, you'll improve as a player. It's not so much about the opening, it's about the ideas you see in the middle game. Often the middle game will come from the opening, so you should know the middle game ideas from the opening. But in general, this is what chess is about: remembering patterns, improving patterns, remembering ideas. And as we see here, the h-pawn push has been very successful in both games. I mean, in part, I guess this is due to the effect of, they say, AlphaZero, who was playing with the h-pawn, and Magnus himself has said he's learnt from AlphaZero's games. Matthew Sadler and Natasha Reagan's on this is highly recommended. But if we go back in history, I know I'm, credited for talking about Harry, but of course other players previous to me have used their wing pawns. The most famous being Bent Larsen, the great Danish player, the strongest ever Danish player. He used his wing pawns to brilliant effect. But it's a technique that's well known, and again, it's something that maybe you guys can try to use in your own games. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you do like it and I get enough likes and subscribes, I may try to do a video every day on this Grand Chess Tour. To encourage me to do that, please do like the video, and if you're not subscribed to my channel, please do subscribe. It helps me a lot trying to get my subscribers up. And yeah, so anyway, thank you guys, and cheers for taking the time to watch this up to this point. Painful to listen to my voice sometimes, but hey ho, it's one of those things you have to do. Cheers for now. Goodbye.